Your hero's back in the shop, looking to cut a rabbit on that picture frame project that we were working on. What I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna lay it out, I'm gonna mark it out, I'm gonna cut it out, I'm gonna miter it, and maybe get a chance to see if I can't glue this thing together. Before I do that, as I always say, the thinking's the hard part. Let's take a look at exactly what we're doing. I tried to describe to you what a rabbit was that allows the picture frame, the glass, the mat board to actually fit into the frame. If you look at this, this is what I have on the outside, but on the back side of this frame shows a great example of exactly what a rabbit is. Remember, my picture was gonna be a certain size. I believe it was gonna be, 21 by 26.5 was my rough cut material, but my other measurement, I forget right now. I'll check it out after when I go to cut my picture frame. But when I look at this, this is what I want to obtain. I want to cut an area out where the frame, the picture, and the mat board all sit in. And that's the way the picture frame holds onto the picture. Today, I'm gonna mark out, as I did on these pieces, my pieces, exactly where I want the rabbit to cut. And if you remember from the last little lesson that we had, there was one issue. There was a little area that didn't get surfaced down. I wanna make sure that I take that section out. To do this, what I did on every single one of these boards is I marked out exactly where the rabbit's gonna be cut on. This is just a piece of scrap wood, and I just wanna show you how you would go about doing it. If you come around to this side, you'll notice that all my parts that are facing up all have an X. Those were all my jointed edges, which means that there's no burn marks on it whatsoever. There's no saw cuts on that. So if I can have a jointed edge facing up, that's that much less work that I have to do. If you look down to the end of each one of these boards, I also marked exactly where the rabbit's going to be cut for one reason or another. If you look at this, you notice that we're going to get rid of almost half of the inside surface of this board. With that in mind, I want to usually keep the lousier part on the inside. The outside, I'm not going to touch. You're going to see that entire surface, so I'll leave that area true. I want to direct your attention to this very last board. I marked out every single one where the rabbit's going to be cut, but I left this one alone because this one happens to have that area that I want to get rid of. If I took this and placed the rabbit on this side, this would be the outside surface that I would be faced with. But what I want to do, again, the thinking's the hard part, plan ahead now. I'm actually going to mark out this rabbit so that I get rid of that section. When that section gets cut by the rabbit, it won't exist anymore, so I'll be in good shape. When I do this, I'm going to take all my boards. I have them positioned exactly the way I'm going to cut them. I always try to do that before I do anything. I'm going to take all my boards. I'm going to slide them over to this side. And we'll make a little scrap rabbit cut here just to show you exactly what I'm trying to get. On my pieces, I marked out something that looks like this. Now there's several ways that you can do this. You can make this cut. And I'll show you what I think works best for me. Some people say that you should raise the blade up to the correct height, which I will do by cranking that hand wheel clockwise. I'll raise it up about to my pencil line. And now the question is, where should I position my fence? If I take this piece, place it this way, and set my fence here, I could make this cut in two passes. I can cut it once this way, then what I could do is flip it around, cut it this way. If I make this in two passes that way, I'm going to have a little piece of waste that wedges in between the fence and the blade. And right now your eyes should be going like this. Oh boy, that's an issue. Because that's the recipe for kickback. Whenever I make the cut, I always take it off on the outside of the blade. That's just a habit that I have. So I raise the blade up to the correct height. If I have to make two cuts, what I'm going to do is make one pass, right up against this outside surface, putting this surface up against the fence. I'll move it over 1/8 of an inch. Why do I move it over 1/8 of an inch? Move it over 1/8 of an inch. Maybe that should be a question. Why do I move the fence over 1/8 of an inch? Because the blade is 1/8 of an inch thick. So in 2 passes, I could create a 1/4 inch wide rabbet by making 1 pass, moving it in 1/8 of an inch, making another pass. The cuts that I'm making are on the outside of the blade. Nothing gets wedged in between the fence and the blade, and this guy stays safe. That's the way I'm going to work this. So I'm going to take my piece. I know that this is a scrap piece of pine. So normally, when I set this, I measure it out. I'm just going to do this by eye. There's the rabbet I want to take out. I'm going to set this up so that the outside surface is flush to an outside tooth right here. I'm just kind of doing this by eye. I'm going to lock the fence down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this as my first cut. The same way that I did it before, I'm going to cut again. I'll use a push block, keeping this outside surface up against the fence. I'm going to make a pass. And what you're noticing is I'm taking out a section, and I'm taking out almost exactly 1/8 of an inch. How do I know that? You could see the width of the blade. So there's my cut that I made. That's about 1/8 of an inch in. And if I look at what I set the fence to, my fence is set at about 5/8 of an inch. That would make sense. This board is 3/4 of an inch thick. I set it to 5/8, so I took out 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to move the fence in, probably pretty close to 1/2 inch. So there's my 5/8 setting. I'm going to loosen up the fence. I'm going to slide it in about 1/8 of an inch, about 1/2 inch. I'll make my second pass. My board, same way, up against the surface, L with my left hand, and I'm simply going to send this through. But I don't want to cut my push stick, push block. I'm going to use a push stick in this case. Position my board, push stick is narrower, and I'm going to push that all the way through. So now if I look at my rabbet that I cut, this is about 1/4 of an inch wide. It's the depth that I wanted it to be, and that's the area that my picture frame, that my mat, my glass, and my picture will sit in. So now I think I'm ready to do it on my good piece. Let me get my cherry pieces, and I'll adjust the fence accordingly. On one of these pieces, I don't know if I'm going to find this. I thought I marked it to the height that it has to be, but I could be wrong, rabbit. Yeah, I might be wrong. Maybe it was on the bad piece. Ah, yes, it was on the bad piece. So there's my rabbet. I was going to cut out a section probably about 1/2 inch deep to allow for the mat, the picture, and the glass, and my backing. So now what I'm going to do, loosen up the fence, slide it out. I'm going to raise the blade up to this exact height, or thereabouts. I take my board, place it up against the table, crank my saw blade up until it makes about contact with my pencil. That's exactly right. Now my question is, what do I set the fence to? You should know in our shop, hardwoods are surfaced to 13/16 of an inch, not 3/4 of an inch. So at 3/4, when I cut that piece of pine, I set it to 5/8 of an inch. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it a little bit more than 5/8, about 11/16. You know what that means? You know what 11/16 means? Oh yes. Bifocals, because I can't see it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen up the fence, slide it over. Again, if you can't read this, you're done. You don't even try it. So if I look at this, I could see an inch, I could see 0, I could see a quarter, I could see 3/4, I could see a half, and everything in between those are eighths, and everything in between that is a 16th. So right now, if I want to be 13/16 of an inch, I have a feeling it's going to be right about there. 11/16, I believe, is right there. And if you're asking the shop teachers to set it for you, you better learn how to sing, because next year you're going to be in choir. I'm lining this up, and I'm going to lock this in place. Before I make my cut, I want to see how accurate I am. I'm going to take this piece of wood, put it up against the fence, and let's see, does it line out? Well, that's almost perfect to those teeth. So I'm going to make my cut at that setting. Remember, that's just going to be my first cut. I don't need 2 pair of glasses to make the cut. I'm going to do this on every single one of my pieces. So as I go across here, I'm going to do it on this piece, this piece, this piece, this piece. And like I said, I marked that rabbit on all of those pieces. I'm going to use my left hand. I think I'm going to use the push stick. Now with my left hand, right thumb on the back end of the board, and I'm going to push this board through. Hold it with my left, right hand with my push stick. I'm going to send the board all the way through it. So there's my rabbit on the first cut. It's about 1/8 of an inch in. Realizing this board has a little bit of a turn to it, when I make the second cut, I want to make sure I hold it up against the fence nice and secure. So I'm going to put this in the back, and I'll move on to every single one of them. Just double check to make sure it's even. Again, when you guys are making this cut, the old shop teacher will be present. Not going to make this cut by yourself, because God forbid if you don't hold that board down securely and tightly, and that board comes up and smacks you in the face, it's a grim lesson. Let it happen to me. The longer boards are a little more challenging. Whoops, that one is that way. Good thing I checked. Sherry also has a tendency of burning. It's just the nature of cherry. I marked all those out. Cut them all in the correct direction. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the fence in a little bit more, because that 1/8 of an inch is not nearly enough for the mat and all that stuff to stay there securely. So I want to cut a minimum of 1/4 of an inch. So if I look at this, I could either by eye move this into 9/16 of an inch, or I could kind of do it by eye. Let me try to do it by eye here. I'm going to loosen up the fence. I'm going to move the fence over and see if I can have this line up to the outside tooth. That's off a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move the fence in a hair more. And I'm going to make a practice cut. What I'm looking to do is not to have a gap there. If I just have this little string there, that's a pretty accurate 1/4 inch rabbit right there. So I'm happy with that setting. It looks like I picked another good day to give up drinking. And I just want you guys to know, I only drink in days that end in Y. Okay, that's important to understand. I'm going to finish these cuts on all of these and give it a shot. I hold it with my left, push it with my right. Now if you look at this, that section looks greater than what I cut out before. It could just be that I held it up against the fence a little bit tighter. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through all of these cuts, finish this. If I have that gap, I don't really wanna chip that out by hand. I'll just go back to the table saw and cut it out like I'm bowling and I take out a spare. So we'll leave this one all the way to the back and we'll cut the rabbit on these other ones. People ask me all the time, that's about where it was before. We go back there and let the saw do our dirty work. Why do I lick my fingers? Sawdust tends to be very slippery. I'm sorry, very slippery. I'm hunting rabbits. It's slippery. So by licking my fingers, I have a little bit better grip on the wood. Can't tell you how many times I've slipped off of a board and averted disaster. Last one for this cut. I know you guys are like, why did you have to make 2 frames? Why not? What the hey? This section bothers me. A lot of times I'll tell you just to take it and snap it off. If you do that, it might chip that rabbit a little bit on the underside. It's gonna make a funny noise, almost like a Star Wars noise. What I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna take this fence, I'm gonna move it back a little bit, just a little bit, and I'm gonna see if I can't take this section out by just using the saw. There's my perfect rabbit. Nice and clean, nice and true. You hear the noise? Does that sound cool? Hey, here's a special shout out to the Canadian Comet. No noise there. I love it when it makes that funny high-pitched noise, like a spaceship. Might he get it on this one? No. This bothers me. My hands aren't going anywhere near that blade. Nobody's calling me 9.5. Last cut. I think I shared this with many of my students. The thing that's always challenging is when you make these repetitious cuts. If you have to make a cut 10 times, 12 times, 15 times, you have to always concentrate at like number 11 because you're not going to have an issue with number 1. You're not going to have an issue with number 14 because you'll be at the end and you'll be like, okay, I'm there. It's all those little cuts in the middle that you have to worry about. If I take a look at my pieces here, I have a rabbit, my perfect rabbit cut on all of these. I don't have to chip anything out. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut the miters on this to get this to the size that it has to be. Now, do I have to know the exact size right now? The correct answer is no, absolutely not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these over to the miter saw and we're going to kind of square an end. We're actually going to cut one miter on each one. We're not going to measure anything. We're not going to make it absolutely perfect. All we're going to do is cut one miter, and then that will give us a point that we can measure from. It's like squaring an end on the board and cutting it to the exact length. You can't take a board and just measure it and cut it to length if it's a piece of hardwood, because it does not have machined edges or ends. So that's why we square an end and cut to length. I'm going to do the same exact thing for these pieces. So I'm going to grab these up. I'm going to take my tape measure. I have a pencil. We'll go over to the miter saw and we'll see if we can remember some basics about that. Oh, by the way, your question is coming up. Walk this way. This way. Yeah. By the way, folks, Young Frankenstein. All these movies that you watch today, watch Young Frankenstein, and it will show you what acting was all about, how acting is the movie, not the special effects. Here we are to the old miter saw. If you take a look at these, this is where we're going to cut that 45-degree angle to create our picture frame. When I do this, this is your question. Should the miter be cut in this direction? Should the miter be cut in this direction? That is the $10,000 question, and here is the answer. Which direction should the miter be cut in if you have a rabbit? The answer is the rabbit always appears, the little gray rabbit always appears on the short end of the miter. So if you look at this piece here, if we were to cut this piece, oops, no eraser. If we were to cut the miter in this direction here, this is the long end, here's the short end. There should be a rabbit over here. If I turn it around, there is a rabbit. If I were to cut the miter in this direction, here is the long end of the miter, here is the short end of the miter. There should be a rabbit over here, there's not. So if I were to make this cut, this would be incorrect. The correct direction that this miter has to be cut in is over here. Now I have too many pencil marks, so I'll mark this one out. If I look at this piece, the miter should be cut in this direction. The miter should be cut in this direction. The biggest mistake that people make is that they'll take this and they'll mark out the exact length of this miter, the exact length of this miter, and you have to be absolutely dead on perfect with both of these cuts. I can't be right twice. That's way too many times for me to be right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this piece, not measure anything, just like when I squared an end. I didn't measure to a line. All I did was cut the angle that it's supposed to be. If I was squaring an end, it had to be 90 degrees. Over here, it's got to be 45 degrees. So guess what I'm going to do? Adjust the miter saw to 45 degrees. To do this, I'm going to take the saw and just push it, just push this saw to 45 degrees, but, oh, I can't do that. Maybe more push-ups, perhaps? No. If you remember to adjust the miter saw, there's a black lock here. I lift up the black lock. On the bottom side, there's a pin. This pin, this spring clip will squeeze together, and now I'm going to move the saw over to 45 degrees. Lock it in at 45 degrees, lock in my lock. I'm all set to make my cut. Now the question is, how much do I cut off of this piece? I don't want to cut too much off, because if I cut too much off, the piece is going to be short. So I'll take two extremes. If I cut it right there, my piece is going to be less than what it has to be. So now what I'm going to do is not cut enough. You come over to this side of the camera. I'll come over to this side. Sleeves rolled up, safety glasses on. I'm going to purposely make a mistake on this cut. I'm going to slide the board over with my left-hand side, holding it down up against the fence, lock it in place, making sure my left hand is all the way to the left-hand side. Grab onto the miter saw, and I'm going to make this cut. So my question to you is, did I square this up or did I cut this well? And the answer is no, it's terrible. If you look at this, this is a flat miter. I have to cut more off than that. Well, I could cut off like this, and this will be a nice sharp miter, but the problem with that is my piece is going to be short. So I want to cut as close to this as I can. I don't want to take off a whole lot more than that angle right there. So what I'm going to do is kind of do it by eye, line it up, slide it in. I'm going to put this back corner about smack dab in the middle of where that cut or kerf is going to line up to. I'm going to say right about there, this mark is about even with that space that the saw blade is going to come down. Let's see if this cuts it as a sharp miter. Slide it back, and if you take a look at this, this is exactly a nice sharp miter. That's my squared end. I'm going to do that same exact cut on every single one of these miters. I'm only going to do it to one because I don't care about this other one until later when I cut it to the exact length it has to be. So real quickly, take my board, put it up against the fence, slide this over. I'm just going to line it up by eye, hold on to it tight with my left hand cut. Oh, not enough. That looks a little bit flat on the end. So I'll take it, just simply butt it up against the blade. Hopefully that's a little bit better. That's perfect. I want to make sure that each one of these comes out to be a nice sharp miter. Line it up, put it where it's got to go, hold on. That looks nice and sharp. And notice any of these pieces that are in the way, that's nice and sharp. I'm not reaching in there and getting those out. If that really bothers me because I have an issue and I need to go for counseling, simply moving them away with my pencil. Remember, safety first, kids. These are all pretty good. 3 more. Yep. 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 All of them look good. Nice and sharp, nice and 45'd, if you look at that. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this out to the exact length that they have to be. But before I do that, I'm going to have to walk over to my board. And what I might do is be smart about it. I'll write down the actual size. I bring those numbers back here. And we're going to use a combination square to cut these pieces to the exact length that they have to be. So I'm going to do that. I'll take a walk over there. Do you want to follow me? No, you don't. Did I give you guys a question? What hair color did my hair used to be? That's a bonus question. If you could figure out what color my hair used to be when I had hair, that's a little extra credit question. Check. Let me take a walk over to the old chalkboard, and I'll see you back in about 5 minutes.